Hello there, my name is Thiago and this is Inglês Everywhere, the podcast that helps you improve your English. I want to invite you to join me every week to take you to the next level, listening to all kinds of content, stories, interviews, chats, and a lot more. Welcome to Inglês Everywhere. Olá, ouvintes do Inglês Everywhere. No episódio de hoje eu converso com o Luiz, que tem o podcast SrIF365 e também o blog. O blog, ultimamente, ele não atualiza mais, mas toda semana tem episódio lá no podcast dele. Eu fiquei muito honrado em ele ter aceitado o meu convite para fazer a entrevista aqui pro meu podcast e a gente conversou sobre bastante coisa. Foi um papo que a gente gravou em inglês. Ele, desde os 10 anos de idade, já demonstra ter muito interesse pelo idioma, isso há 30 anos, época em que não existia internet, as estratégias que a gente conseguia utilizar para estudar o inglês eram bem escassas comparado ao que a gente tem hoje em dia, e ele fala um pouco sobre estratégia que ele utilizava na época e quão importante foi o inglês na carreira dele. Ele é piloto, ou era piloto, porque já se aposentou, e a gente conversou um pouco sobre o começo da carreira dele até ele se mudar para o Oriente Médio e trabalhar para uma companhia aérea fazendo voos internacionais. Eu não vou aqui dar muito spoiler porque o papo foi bastante interessante, bastante enriquecedor e eu creio que tem bastante conhecimento interessante que ele compartilhou e bastante interessante para você. Caso você tenha interesse em conhecer um pouquinho mais sobre o podcast dele, eu vou deixar aqui na descrição o link para que você possa acessar o podcast do SrIF365. Vamos então à entrevista. So Luiz, thank you very much for joining our show here today. And I'd like to start asking you, when did you start studying English?
It's my pleasure to be here. Actually, it's hard to define when I started because since I was very young, I think I was very interested on things coming from abroad, especially at that time, of course, we just knew US and Europe, and everything that came from abroad was a big interest of mine. And of course, I couldn't understand what people were saying, or I remember my friends bringing toys from the US, and I couldn't read the manuals, reading the instructions, so it was a big frustration to me. So I think this kind of sparkled the idea that I could at least learn English to understand what was going on abroad. So at very early age that started. I'm going to guess it was around maybe 10 years old. Mm-hmm. And since then, I got involved in English in many different ways. We're going to talk later about that. But I think my first attempt to learn English was through my father's old book. He used to study Nyazeji when he was very, very young, and he still kept those books. So I reached for those books and started to learn by myself, but of course it didn't work. It was way too advanced at that time. He tried to help, but eventually he put us on an English school at a very early age. I think it was around 10 years old.
Okay, so you already had the motivation to start.
Yeah, that's how it all began. I always had this fascination for everything coming from abroad.
Uh-huh. And do you remember the strategies you first used? Because today we have lots of resources. We have the internet, streaming services, but back then we didn't.
Well, that was almost 30 years ago, I guess. So, of course, we didn't have internet. We didn't have anything. So the only things available at that time, I think, would be the books. And I remember some magazines as well. So that's the only thing we had at that time. Right now, I think, especially with YouTube, it would be great if we had YouTube at that time, so I could use this fascination that I had for things from abroad to watch any kind of video I want.
All right. And how did the English language help you in your career?
Well, basically, I haven't said anything, but I was an airline pilot. So that's, for me, since the beginning, there was a minimum to go ahead with this career. So because practically all the manuals anything you're going to learn, anything you're going to study, it's going to be in English. So it's pretty much mandatory to speak English. You cannot even start your career and not speaking English. So although I was not very fluent at the time, I think I improved a lot over the years just because I was forced to study in English, communicate in English, and later on I moved to abroad for work. So that forced me even more to improve my English over the time. So it wasn't something planned, but it just started happening, and it was something I couldn't stop because I was forced to learn it at a certain point, different things. Of course, it's a different English for my profession because there are a lot of technical terms. You need to speak over the radio, and some people, even native English speakers, they don't understand what you're saying because I have no idea what you're talking because we're communicating with like air traffic controllers. So it kind of sounded completely, it's in English, but sounds like a complete different language. So although if you do speak English and you plan to be a pilot, it's almost like learning a third language. So I speak Portuguese, I speak English, and this is this we call aviation, let's say. So it's a third kind of language. It's in English, but it's kind of different terms and a lot of technical terms.
Okay, so if anyone is thinking about becoming a pilot, they have to know how to speak English and also learn this third language you're talking about.
Yeah, the third language, of course, there's no way to actually study it. There's no course for it. So you're gonna learn as you go. But English, it's completely mandatory. If you think about being a pilot, being a cabin crew, or anything like that, it's pretty much mandatory. Even if you don't plan to fly abroad, if you don't plan to work abroad, any airline nowadays, the first thing they're gonna ask if do you speak English. They're going to test you to see if you speak English. Also, for pilots, for cabin crew, they don't have that. But for pilot, we take a formal test, which is going to grade you from non-speaker to level, they call level 6. So the minimum level there for you to fly will be 4. So it's pretty much mandatory if you ever plan to be a pilot someday.
Okay, so then you started flying professionally in domestic flights, and how did this transition to move abroad happen?
Yeah, most of my career was here in Brazil. My career, I guess, was around 22 years total, and I can say that 16 years of those were in Brazil. So it's a very slow progress. You start in a very small airplanes. Then if you're lucky, you get your first job on an airline, and then you got to be even luckier for this airline not to bankrupt. As we see right now, the major airlines all over the globe are struggling, but that's nothing new for us that they're in the business. We've seen that happening before with Varig, Transbrasil, all those legacy airlines. We saw that happening, and now it might happen again with this the current airlines we have, LATAM and Azul, etc. So that kind of usually pushes the pilots who got. I was lucky enough not to be fired, but I saw things going down very quickly. So I decided to look for options. One of the options was to actually leave Brazil and go work abroad. I started looking at different places. Unfortunately for me, I don't hold any European passport, so I'm not entitled to fly in Europe. So I had to look into maybe Asia, Middle East, Africa. So you start looking at these kind of jobs. Of course, all of them, everyone communicates in English. That's the official language in aviation. But I end up going to the Middle East for different reasons. It was let's say a middle ground between the extreme of living in China, for example, and not being able to work in Europe. So Middle East, people say, oh, Middle East, it must be a very dangerous place, but it's completely different from what people think. Pretty much everyone there speaks English, although the official language is Arabic, but because there are so many expats, people coming from the UK, coming from the US, even coming from India, where they do speak English because they were colonized by the British. So you end up just speaking English over there, although you're in the Middle East. So that was my push I was actually pushed from Brazil to work abroad because of these economic cycles that happen from time to time in Brazil.
Okay, I see. So, as a pilot, do you keep living like at different places because you're always flying, always going to different places? So, how did your schedule work?
Well, when I was a pilot, I'm going to start saying I was because
Okay.
we haven't mentioned it yet, but I quit flying for
Uh-huh.
about 2 years now. So I like to think myself as a retired pilot,
Uh-huh.
but it's still fresh on my mind, of course. So for this past almost 20 years, I was like based in São Paulo, and then I was, of course, based abroad. But basically, what you do, you leave somewhere, you're going to report for a flight, and usually this flight can be from something that is just what we call turnaround, that you just fly somewhere and you come back right away a few hours later, to something that can be up to like 6 or 7 days traveling, depend where you're
Oh.
going. And of course, you don't go there and stay 7 days and come back. You're going to be doing different patterns of flight. So I remember here in Brazil, we could go from São Paulo, Curitiba, and then Porto Alegre. Stay in Porto Alegre. Next day, we leave from Porto Alegre to Rio, Rio to Fortaleza, and sleep in Fortaleza. So you keep doing this for the next 6 or 7 days, and then you come back home. You might get 1, 2, or if you're very lucky, 3 days off, and then you start all over again. When I moved to the Middle East, it was slightly different because it starts being like a long haul flight. So it's
Mhm.
not like domestic flights; they are all international flights. So I should say it's a little bit easier. Basically, all the flights were a long leg. So you fly all the way to Europe, you stay there for 24 hours, and then come back. You might rest a day, you might do it again next day. So depends pretty much on your schedule, but usually you're living at your base. So my base was in the Middle East, and then from there I used to fly different patterns and having my days off at my base. So I was pretty much forced to live abroad, and I could not live in Brazil. I know some pilots. If you live near your base, like you have a lot of people from the UK, people from Spain, these people could do what they call commuting. So
Mhm.
you're going to be based in a place, but on your days off, you try to go home to commute home. So if you have like 4 days off, they just arrive from a flight and they get another flight right away just to go home. Of course, they're not being paid; it's not part of the job. But I never done that because I find too stressful. I always like to leave on my base because then when you go home, you need to start planning how you're going to come back. Because although we can of course fly for free, but only if they have empty seats. So you start worrying if the flight is not full, you need to come back for work, and sometimes you arrive from a 12 hours flight. The last thing you want to do is to hop in a plane again to go back home. So I never
Mhm.
done that in my entire career. I've seen friends doing that. Even here in Brazil,
Wow.
I used to fly. I used to live near my base here in São Paulo, and I had friends living everywhere in Brazil. People live in Fortaleza. Some people live even in Manaus. So I saw these people just coming from a 7 day trip, hopping on an airplane again and going home, for example, to Manaus to spend like 2 or 3 days near the family, and then having to come back to São Paulo to for another like 6 or 7 days of flight. So it's kind of stressful, but that's pretty much how it works for pilots all around the globe.
Wow, so it's stressful and exhausting. Yeah. And for 22 years, you were working like this, having this hectic schedule.
Yeah, you don't have control over your life. That's what bothers me the most. I love flying. I love being in a hotel. I love visiting new places, but all the rest really sucks. That's I have to be very. I'm sorry to say that, but it really sucks. All the rest, the flying, it's amazing, and everything that is involved. The flying itself, it's amazing, but everything else. Training is pretty hard. You're being trained all the time. You're being tested all the time. You're being monitored all the time. Plus, you leave a big part of your personal life behind once you hop into this career because pilots are not paid to stay home, and
Mhm.
you cannot work from home. So because of this pandemic that we're going through, you see most of the jobs can be done at home. A lot of people who work in the office, they're doing the same thing they do at home. And for my friends that are pilots, they're pretty much out of job because, of course, all the flights are empty. Most of the
Mhm.
aircrafts are grounded. Borders are closed, so international flights are not happening right now. So these people are pretty much out of job. If they are lucky, they're still being paid a little bit to stay at home. But I have a lot of pilots being laid off at this time. Uh, I have a lot of friends also in the company I used to work for in the Middle East being fired. So it's been a tough situation right now for them.
Yeah. Okay. And what about life in the Middle East? While you were living there, what was your experience like?
Was very good. I don't regret anything. Of course, you have to go there with an open mind because it's a place, of course, that starts with the. It's a different because of the religion itself. Because people are very they follow the religion to the teeth. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to go with an open mind and understand they are doing that because of their religion, because of their culture. So that clashes a lot on, especially what we have in Brazil. So everything that you see on TV, those women cover themselves in abaya. You see the guys that walking in white pajamas. We still call that pajamas, but of course it's their clothes. They call clothes, and we call pajamas. Anyways, all those things you see on TV, it's actually they're normal. So when you first arrive, you kind of get shocked to say, "Oh my God, what did I do?" Or these people are so weird. But as the time goes by, especially in countries like the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, all these countries, they have so many expats that the culture starts to mix. So you see, I would say 50-50. So 50% of the locals, 50% of expats. So you end up mixing all this culture, and becomes very interesting what happens. Of course, there are some clashes, like
Mm-hmm.
in the Middle East, they cannot just sell alcohol anywhere. So they have special places that only expats with special license that they say, I'm not a Muslim, so I can buy alcohol. So you go there, you buy your alcohol, but then you bring home like it's something illegal. They put in a black plastic bag to you. They wrap it up. You need to put in your car. You cannot just carry on your hand. You can only drink at home. You cannot drink, for example, like if you live in a compound, cannot drink on a swimming pool because you're not allowed. People cannot see you drinking. So these kind of things, it requires certain adjustment, which is pretty easy. It's pretty easy nowadays because as I said, most of the people living there are expats, so uh, it's easy. Some countries are not so easy, like is Saudi Arabia, for example. Those guys are very extreme to this concerning religion itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I assume living there is much harder than living in the rest of the Middle East, as I mentioned, Bahrain, Qatar, or UAE. Those are much more liberal. So requires a small adjustment, but it's totally doable.
Okay. So how long did it take you until you got used to it?
Well, we never really get used to it. Sometimes they're great. Sometimes I just say, "Oh my God, this is so annoying." Like
Mm-hmm.
they have this holy month that they call Ramadan. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you heard about,
Yeah.
but it's a holy month where they must fast. They cannot eat or drink
Mm-hmm.
anything, and not even water, from the sunrise to the sunset. Of course, they don't force you to do that, but for example, uh, you cannot drink water on the street. Even if you're not fasting, they
Whoa.
don't allow you to drink water on the street. Of course, all the restaurants are closed. It's funny I'm saying this is so bizarre because all the restaurants now are closed. So it's like living a pandemic 1 month every year. So imagine the pandemic that we have
Uh-huh.
right now. So during the day, everything is closed. Everyone is fasting. Everyone is pretty much in a bad mood because everyone is hungry, of course. You're
Mm-hmm.
tired and everything. So all this thing we're living here right now is seeing everything closed is what we have to go through once a year. So after sunset, of course, they have a big gathering. They eat and everything, but it's something that I never got used to. Every time Ramadan approaches, I start to get in a bad mood because I was single living there. So I like to go out at least like on a coffee shop during the day. I like to go out for lunch, for example, if I don't want to cook at home. So pretty much where we're living here right now because of this pandemic, it was what I was living every year, at least 1 month a year.
I see. So there was always a plan to leave because it would never feel like home for you,
I guess no
right?
one who goes there
Uh-huh.
plans to retire and living at that place. Most of the expats, of course, they pay very well because not everyone is willing to
Mm-hmm.
relocate there, to take the family there. Although it's a very good place, schools are awesome. It's extremely safe. I think the country I was living was the third or fourth safest country in the planet. So there are many advantages to move there, but not
Mm-hmm.
everyone is willing to move there, especially because of the culture and because things you see on TV is not exactly what you see on TV. People being extremist, and what you see on TV, it's a completely different of these specific places that I mentioned, the big cities like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Doha, Bahrain. So it's completely different. It's like being Miami, but people don't sell alcohol. So I think that's
Mm-hmm.
the description I would give you. So, but nobody plans to live there forever, and you cannot live there forever because as an expat, you go there to work. So your visa it's for work only. Once you resign, like for me, when I resigned, I have like 15 days to leave the country. I need to pack my stuff and go. I cannot just stay. No one is there just littering, just doing nothing on the street. Everyone is employed. Everyone is working, especially because of this visa things. So everyone that goes there has an expired date, as I like to say. Everyone has a plan. I'm going to work here for like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. But at a certain point, everyone plans to leave, either to go back home or to relocate somewhere else. So pretty much you're not going to find anyone, except the locals, of course. But you're not going to find any expat planning to retire and live there, even if they could.
Okay, I imagine because you were in such a hurry, you didn't even have time to make friends, to hang out, this kind of things that we normally do. Is that right?
Well, there is a big Brazilian community, especially. Of course, there are Brazilians everywhere now. It's
Yeah.
hard to find a place where you don't see Brazilians. So
I know.
it was very easy to move there for me because what happened? You asked me why I moved there. I blame the economic crisis here in Brazil, but another thing that happened is that I saw my good friends at work doing the same. So actually, they went before me when I arrived there. Most of my friends that I had here in Brazil from work, they were already there. So when I arrived, was pretty much hanging out with the same people that made it so much easier to relocate. And I actually hang out more with them when I was there than when I was here because the city was much smaller. We all moved to the same compound, and plus because you don't have family there. I didn't have family there. They don't have. Of course, they had their wife and the kids, but they didn't have cousins, parents living there. So they end up having to call me to go out more often than here in Brazil, because here in Brazil, of course, they had the rest of the family to hang out with,
Yeah.
and there we were way closer because it's Brazilian community. People who lives abroad, they know that you end up creating these Brazilian communities everywhere, so you end up hanging out more with their friends than your actual family
Hmm.
left in Brazil.
Yeah. So now you have a, I don't know if I may call her girlfriend or wife. Y- and did you meet her while you were living there?
Yeah, when I was living there, when I moved there, I was single, and through these 5 years, I met what she's my wife right now. So we
Okay.
start dating in the Middle East, which is also a big challenge
Mm.
because local laws don't allow men and women to be together alone in a certain place. They have all these things, but they don't actually enforce on the expats. They do enforce on the locals because of the religions and stuff, but they also don't give you an easy time. I remember once I was driving her home. We were, of course, not living together. We were not allowed to live together there. But I was driving her home, and the police stopped us. And the first thing the police officer asked me was not if I had a driver's license. He didn't ask for my documents. First thing he asked, "Who is she?" He wanted to know,
Wow.
who is she? Like he was trying to figure out if I was a married guy and I was hanging out
Uh-huh.
with a cabin crew. She was a cabin crew at the time. So it's kind of weird. He never asked for my documents. He just wanted to know, who is she? Who is she? Why you're driving at night with her and things like that. So these kind of things, it's very weird. So we start dating there. Once I resigned, she resigned as well. She went back to her country. She's from Indonesia. She gathered all her documents that she needed to relocate to Brazil to get the residency here. So we got married, got her residency, and now we're living here in Brazil.
Indonesia, what is their first language there?
It's contrary to what people think. That is Indonesian. They have a weird word for it, which is bahasa. It's very weird because bahasa means dialect. So they kind of speak dialect. It doesn't make much sense. I always say, oh, you speak Indonesian. No, I speak bahasa. There's bahasa Indonesian, bahasa Malaysian. It's very similar, but it's different. But she speaks bahasa. So we end up communicating in a middle ground because she's trying to learn Portuguese, which is extremely difficult. It's one of the reasons I love English, because when you compare Portuguese to English, it's so much easier. I remember I was horrible at Portuguese in school. And when I figured out that English was so much easier, that's one of also the reasons that I wanted to learn so much. It's so much easier. So she's having a hard time to learn Portuguese. She's been living in Brazil for a year now. She's still struggling. Of course, I'm not helping because we end up communicating a lot in English, because it's just easier for me not to keep translating things, repeating myself. It's partially my fault, but she's starting hard. But we end up communicating in English, which is not her primary language. It's not neither mine. So we kind of sometimes we have a problem in communication. We have a big communication barrier.
Yeah. Couples usually, when they are from different backgrounds, language can be a big barrier. So let's start talking now about the FIRE movement. You are a FIRE, and to start off, can you kind of summarize what it means to you to be a FIRE?
Yeah, I know you had an interviewer before who spoke about it. It's kind of, we like to think it's a movement, but it's more like a lifestyle of people who realize that they don't want to just work forever in life. So at certain point, I don't know if you want to call that mid-crisis age. How do you call that? Mid-crisis? No.
Middle-age crisis.
Yeah, yes. Middle-age crisis. I don't know if you want to call that, but at a certain point, you just realize that unless you are in love with your job, you realize that you don't want to do that forever. At a certain point, I realized that I didn't want to fly forever. I didn't want to spend Christmas in a hotel forever. I didn't want to fly on New Year's Eve forever. Although I loved flying, I didn't want to do that forever. So I started looking for alternatives. And that's when I found out about the FIRE movement, which is Financial Independence, Retire Early, which basically is just saving money, investing, and having enough income from these investments so you don't have to work. At least you have to cover your expenses. So once you're able to save enough money, invest in having this, what do we call passive income, so you don't have to work for this money, now you're free to do whatever you want. If you want to, in my case, continue flying, I would continue flying. If I want to just quit flying and stop flying, that's what I did. Some people are luckier than me because I couldn't just go to my employee and say, I want to fly less. There's no such a thing. Say, I have enough money. I don't need my full salary. Can you pay me half salary and I'll fly half of the hours that you need me to? That doesn't exist. Everyone works the same. So some people I know, if, for example, you are a doctor, you could, you work for yourself, of course. You could just work from Monday to Wednesday, for example, and have the rest of the week free. So that's a possibility. So basically, once you have enough money invested and you have this passive income that you don't depend on your work for living, you can decide whatever you want to do in life. I know some people say you're not early retired if you're still working, but I know some people, they just change their careers. They make a career shift, for example. They do something and they're not working for the money. So I would also consider he's early retired because he doesn't depend on the money. He's just doing something for fun, even if he's not being well paid or sometimes not even paid at all. So basically, this is the FIRE movement. You're financially independent, and also, if you want to, be early retired, as they call.
Yeah. And how long have you been retired for now?
Well, I'm trying to avoid this retired word because people, associated with me being very old and the end of my life and everything. So I tell people that I'm on sabbatical, so I'm taking the year off, but basically I'm on my second year already. So I'm renewing my sabbatical. Maybe I'm gonna stay one more year out of the workforce. But my plan, if everything goes well, is to never go back flying. As I said, I really miss flying, the flying itself, but I don't miss all the rest that is involved. I know this year, of course, I spent Christmas and New Year's with my entire family. So there was a blessing. There was something I was never able to do. If I were very lucky, at a certain point, I could just choose either Christmas or New Year's. When I had to work on one of them, so the other guys could also spend these holidays with the family. So this year I was able to do both for the first time in 20 years. So I'm not planning to go back, but basically I say I'm on almost 2 years already. Since I resigned, so I'm gonna consider that I'm 2 years already early retired.
Okay. Luis, a lot of people say that they don't want to retire because they may feel bored doing nothing at home. So, do you feel bored?
We all do at a certain point.
Uh-huh.
I could even feel bored when I was working. I just find it very sad if you depend on if you're not in love with your work. If you're in love with your work, just disregard whatever I say here. But I feel sad for people who say I'm working so because I will feel bored if I don't. And I don't love my job. It's not something I love, but I don't know what else to do. So I think the problem here is a little bit deeper. Is that like you don't know what you like, so you're just filling the blanks with your work that you don't even like, which was what happened to me at a certain point. Of course, in the beginning, I was in love with my career. I thought I could do that forever. I don't ever want to retire. But once I realized that I don't love this anymore, I wish I could be doing something else. So I was just filling the blank with my career. But since I quit my job, I had ups and downs. It started very well. I had this dream of, okay, I'm gonna early retire. I don't have to work for money anymore, so I don't have to be tied up to a single place. I'm gonna travel the world. I'm gonna see new things. I'm not gonna stop home. I started with the right foot doing that. It was amazing. Right after I retired, I came back to Brazil, left my stuff here, and went to Australia. So I spent 3 months driving with my wife now around Australia, and that was amazing. I wish I could do that even longer, but I just didn't have the means. Although I'm early retired, although I saved a lot of money, I depend on this income. I cannot just go to my let's call big nest or the money that I saved. I cannot just keep pulling money out of there. I depend on the investments, the money that the passive income that comes every month to live. So I'm not a millionaire, let's say that, because I cannot just spend whatever I want. I have a budget and I have to follow that budget. Unfortunately, this budget was not enough to live in Australia. So we have a plan not to live in Australia, but to live in Indonesia, which is her home country. Should be much cheaper than live in Australia. Maybe cheaper than living in Brazil. We tried that for 3 months and it didn't work. We chose to live in Bali, which people may think it's amazing. Oh my God, Bali is amazing. But it's like coming out of the big city from like Sao Paulo, where you have everything, and going to an extreme place in maybe north of Brazil. It's beautiful, but it's not easy to live. It's not easy to adapt. So it was much harder to adapt to live there than in the Middle East, even for her. So we figured out that wasn't for us. It wasn't as cheap as we expected because it's a tourist place. So when you start looking for rent, for example, people wanted $2,000 a month for a rent because it's a tourist place.
Wow.
Because they said I can just rent 1 week for tourists and make that. So I'm going to charge you $2,000 if you want. So when we start seeing that, we said, okay, we scrap this plan. Let's go back to Brazil, regroup, and decide what to do. So next step was to come to Brazil, get married. She's going to get her residency. And from there, we said, well, maybe we can relocate to Portugal because they have this special visa for who's retired. And it doesn't matter if you are early retired or if you are retired at the normal age. As long as you have an income that you can use to live in Portugal, they're going to grant you this visa. So we tried to get this visa, but then the pandemic hit exactly when we apply for this visa. So Portugal has all the borders closed. We've been stuck in Brazil now for almost 6 months. Way before we start planning this was, so if I consider when we start planning this was already 8 to 7 months. So we're pretty much stuck in Brazil, living in my parents' house. My parents are living in Portugal. Their house is empty. So we are using their house because we were planning to relocate. So at that point, when things starts to get boring, because we didn't want to be here, we were continue to save money because things could be a little bit more expensive in Portugal. So say, let's hold down on spendings. Let's not do much. Let's not travel much. Just wait for the Portugal things to come out. And then we're going to see, we're going to start, let's say, living our life. That was the plan. Since this didn't happen, the pandemic hit. So now I can say I'm a little bit bored because of that, but otherwise, I don't miss a minute going back to flight. I say, okay, it could be worse. I could be flying to the middle of the pandemic and everything. So I don't regret.
Okay, so you don't consider flying again, but have you ever thought about training to do something different and working again?
Yeah, I would like to work again. I wouldn't mind to go back to work, but I'm trying
Uh-huh.
to find something I'm passionate about.
Uh-huh.
Like we were discussing before, I hold my own podcast. I used to have this blog that I write about financial independence. I love
Mhm.
to do that. I like to sit in front of the computer, record a podcast or write an article to my blog.
Mhm.
Although I would like to call that a job, I wouldn't mind to do that as a job. I don't get paid
Mhm.
for it. I don't make any cent on that, so
Mhm.
I cannot really call it a job. So maybe in the future something will hit me and that will become a job. But right now, I don't see anything that I feel like going after as a job to work
Oh,
for. Right now, I'm just regrouping. We're planning to live in Brazil now. We're going to relocate and then see what we're going to do. But in my mind right now, the perfect thing would be to be in Brazil and be traveling like 3 or 4 times a year, and in between doing something that remote work or something. But so far, no ideas what we could do.
mhm. Okay, cool. And what about your family and friends? How do they react to this decision, to this early retirement? I don't know if you've told them that you have made this decision, that you belong to this movement.
Well, I don't put a label on it when I speak
Uh-huh.
to them, but I cannot hide that I don't work. So they kind of assume what's going on here. You haven't been working for 2 years now. Of course, my parents know that that
Mhm.
was the plan all along. Uh, I think I've been thinking about this early retirement thing even before I went to work in the Middle East. Of course, the Middle East boosted my plans. I was going to stay there for 10 years. Then I reduced to 8, and eventually in 5 years, I was able to save enough money. What they call here in Brazil, pé de meia. I
Mhm.
was able to save enough money to come back here and not needing to work anymore. I hope things will stay this way. But it's been quite fine for 2 years, and people around me already realize that something is different because I'm unemployed and I'm not looking for a job. So they say, "What's going on here?" So when they ask, I try to explain them. Say, where do I invest my money?
Mhm.
For the closest friend, I explain them how much I can get from these investments. Explain to them it's not nothing really guaranteed that you're going to get it, but people basically understand. But then the next question is, what do you do with your free time? The biggest concern is always there are two big there the two biggest concerns are because I don't have kids, so they say I cannot do this because I have kids. The
Mhm.
second one is I cannot do that because I don't know what to do in my life. I don't know how to fill the blanks. So basically, there's these two obstacles that people are concerned about, and they keep doing these questions to me. But now, after almost 2 years, my family understands my situation. They don't even they don't even care anymore. So for them,
Mhm.
it's normal to see me home, and the rest of my friends, they I don't know if they're too concerned about it, but they also accept it.
Mhm. Uh, since you made this decision to retire early, how long did it take until you had, let's say, enough money to stop to quit?
Well, usually mine is a very unusual case because my profession is highly paid abroad. So
Uh-huh.
we're the pay is pretty good in Brazil, but when you go abroad, it goes crazy because not, as I
Mhm.
said, not everyone is willing to relocate to the Middle East. Not everyone is willing to relocate to China, for example. So the ones there are, they are very well compensated. Plus, it's in U.S. dollar. Everyone gets paid in U.S. dollars. So you do the math. It's going to be like 4 or 5 times
Yeah.
more than you're going to earn in Brazil. So it's already very well compensated here in Brazil. You multiply that by 4 or 5 times once you go abroad. And then it's very common for expats to be offered a whole package that includes like housing, transport, school for the kids, healthcare, and everything. So you end up earning 5 times more than you do, for example, here in Brazil, and you don't
Mhm.
spend with anything. I only
Yeah.
had to buy food. If I want to just buy food and live out of that, that's it. I'm going to spend only on food that month. All the rest is paid for. But of course, I used to. You don't just live. You want to, of course, buy a car. You want to do some traveling, etc., etc. But if you want to, you just go there. You want 4 or 5 times more, and you're going to be spending just on food if you want to
Mhm.
just live like that. So that speed up a lot my financial independence. It's something very unusual. So it's not fair for people to compare themselves with me. Usually,
Mhm.
the financial independence uh, path is much longer than that. I would say for a normal job or normal paying job, it's something that it's going to be achieved in between 15 to 20 years. All depends on how much is your savings rate,
Uh-huh.
which means how much you earn and how much you spend. So it doesn't matter if you make a lot of money but you spend a
Mhm.
lot. It can happen that you're never going to reach financial independence because you just spend everything. Some people they don't earn that much, but they're saving a lot. So in this case, you could be looking 10 to 15 years. And there's the middle ground that it's the healthy one that you're not jeopardizing too much today, but you're also not spending everything you earn. So if you're saving like 60% of your income, you're able to
Mhm.
save 60% of income, you're looking to a 15 years or horizon to reach your financial independence.
I see. I see. And well, in terms of investments, did you study? Did you take any course? How did you learn how to invest?
No, I'm horrible with that. I don't like to deal with money. People are going to find it weird because I write about money. I
Uh-huh.
write about financial independence, but I hate to look at the numbers. I hate to look at the company's stocks and everything. So basically, what I do is just I browse around the internet. I see forums. I read other people's opinion. I try to make my own based on that. But most importantly, I try to keep it simple because it can be very simple to invest. If you don't want to complicate, your options are very narrow. So basically, what I do, I only invest on things that will give me, it will generate an income, like buying a house and getting a rent. I don't do that. I have my house, of course, it's for rent, but it's not something I suggest people to do. But there are a lot of investments here in Brazil, for example, that they generate monthly income. They call like real estate investment trust or REITs, what they
Mhm.
call, which is called fundos imobiliários in Brazil,
Mhm.
which is basically you're buying a small part of a mall or you're buying a small part of industry, a small part of a building. So this building, this mall, they receive rent and they pass over this rent to you as part of your investment. So it generates income. So I don't have many options there. I either have stocks, these fundos imobiliários, and something abroad. So I try to keep it very simple.
And your money is here in Brazil, or do you also invest abroad?
I wish it was more abroad because of these ups and downs that we see here in Brazil. But when I was working abroad, I was very tempted to bring all to Brazil because when we have the previous government, US the US dollar went all the way up to 416, which would be a blessing nowadays. But at that time was crazy because I remember when I left to the Middle East. US dollars. I think it was like 2.7 or
Wow.
2.8, something like that. It was like that. And then it went all the way up to 4.16. I was so happy, saying, I'm making so much money here. I'm going to send all to Brazil and invest all in Brazil. That was a
Mhm.
huge mistake because we know what happened now. The
Yeah.
dollar is it almost reached 6 real. We were expecting to reach 6 real. So because of my plan to live abroad, it was horrible. It was something that really um made me rethink if it was a good idea to move to Portugal, because what I make here in Brazil would not be enough to keep me there. So that was a big mistake. So what I suggest nowadays is that anyone who's looking to live off their investments and stop working, they need to realize: do you want to live in Brazil or you want to live abroad? If you want to live in Brazil, it's okay to keep most of your money here in Brazil. But if you plan to live abroad, you plan to be traveling all the time, you're planning to spend in dollar, for example, you must have a lot of your assets outside here. You must either invest in Europe, invest in US. Don't keep everything here. For now, I have around 80% in Brazil, 20% abroad. But it's not at, at this rate that we see now, 530, 550. It's a pretty tight budget to keep me living abroad. So that's one of the reasons we're staying in Brazil right now and see what happens.
Yeah. And so if anyone is interested in any further information about investments and the FIRE movement, they can check your podcast, right? Can you talk a little bit about what kind of content you have in the podcast?
Yeah, this podcast, actually, I started with a blog. So most of what I write, most of my ideas or everything I write about this fire movement, it's there. But then I start with this podcast, which it was just to complement what I had on the blog. So you're gonna see the first 20 or 25 episodes. They're basically interviewing people who are also after financial independence. So if you start listening to the podcast from the beginning, you're gonna see all these different stories. There are people, for example, living in Canada. Some people living in Portugal. There are people living in the north of Brazil. So from all over, but with the same objective, which is to reach financial independence. And some of them early retire, some not. But basically, we'll be talking about with these people. And lately, because I stopped writing on the blog, you're gonna see what I used to write on the post. You're gonna see in the podcast, along with some interviews. But nowadays, very hard to find new people to be interviewed. This fire community is very small,
Hmm.
so I'm running out of people to be interviewed. But who goes to this podcast, to my podcast, can still, you're gonna find same things you find in the blog, but in a different format.
Okay. Just to wrap up, let me ask you another question about language, since I am a teacher.
Mhm.
So before you went to the Middle East, were you already as fluent as you are now? Because you're almost native like.
Uh, yeah, I think we skipped that. But
Yeah.
before, of course, living in the Middle East, I lived in US for a year. So when I was
Okay.
17, 16, I think, yeah, around that. uh, what happened before. When I was a kid, as I said, I was fascinated about everything coming abroad. So I thought it was a good idea to have an exchange student here at home. So I don't know how my parents accepted to host an Australian guy, and later we hosted a Japanese guy. So as part of an exchange student program. And after that, I started bugging them to say, I want to go to the U.S. Not go to the U.S. I want to go. I want to be an exchange student in the U.S. My target was the U.S. I was so fascinated about the country that I said that has to be U.S. But this program could be anywhere, because we had someone from Australia, we had someone from Japan, could be from anywhere from the globe. So I was lucky enough to get this exchange student program to send me to the U.S. So I spent 1 year there, going to high school, and that's where I kind of improved my English. I remember before that I was studying, I don't know, maybe 4 years, up to 5 years, and so I could talk, but I could not understand when I arrived there. So I could speak, I could tell what
Mhm.
what I needed. Can I have some water? Can I go somewhere, etc. But when they respond, I realize, oh my God, 5 years was nothing to understand what people were saying. Later, I realized I was very unlucky to end up in Texas. So Texas,
Wow.
they have this Texas
Mhm.
accent, which is really tough to understand. So I don't think that helped. But I think it was after this year living abroad, that's where it was the big through on my learning experience. From there, things become so much easier. I think because believe it or not, I only met one Brazilian when I was living 1 year in Texas, and the city was huge. I don't know if because of that time we didn't have internet, or the neighborhood I was living was not very. People, I don't know. There was no Brazilian in school, believe it or not. I was in a public school. There's not a single Brazilian in this school, so I was forced to learn. I was forced to interact, and there was the big breakthrough on my learning experience.
Yeah, I usually say that Brazilians are like viruses. They're everywhere. Once I went to this small town in England, and in my class, there were 3 or 4 Brazilian students. So it was an exception for you in Texas, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm really surprised because, of course, after that, I traveled many times in Brazil. And now, for example, if you go to Miami, people just, they speak fluent, even the Americans, they speak fluent Portuguese. People in stores, when you first arrive at the store, first they know you're Brazilian. I don't know how. I don't know if we have a Brazilian flag on our forehead, but they know you're Brazilian and they speak to you in a fluent Portuguese, even though they're not Brazilian. So it was pretty luck on this exchange student year that I spent in the U.S. And for better or for worse, because it was also good that we had so many Brazilians as an expat. When I moved to the Middle East, there was a huge help. So some people complain, saying, I want to go where there are not so many Brazilians. I think that's very important if you're trying to learn a language, because it's very tempting to gather with your own people, especially when you're living abroad, because it's not easy. It's you feel very fragile, and you're gonna miss home, so you tend to group with Brazilians, of course, to try to minimize that. But if you're trying to learn a language, it's best not to go to a place where you're gonna find any Brazilians. It's gonna force you to learn the language.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Luiz, I don't even know how to thank you for accepting my invitation, and it was a pleasure to have you here.
It was my pleasure. I hope we talk next time. I've been following your podcast. Very interesting.
Oh, thanks.
And as I said, there's another guy talking about financial independence. But I'll leave my blog available to you guys, although it's in Portuguese, so you guys are not going to practice English. But
okay, so can you tell us the address and also the podcast?
Yeah, just Google for SrIF, SrIF365. It's a horrible name. I know, doesn't make any sense to you guys, but it translated, it's Mr. Financial Independence. So Senhor Independência Financeira 365. And then you're going to find, you're going to end up at the blog or the podcast. And if you're interested in financial independence, you can write me from there, and I'll be glad to answer your emails and questions.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for listening. You can send me suggestions on Twitter, Instagram, or by voice message. Also, follow us on your favorite streaming platform to check out for the next episode. On ingleseverywherepodcast.wordpress.com, you can have some further information about our show episodes, including transcripts. See ya!